This is a priest who has been an abbot of a monastery for over 20 years, from which tonsured monks, novices, and parishioners keep leaving year after year. They leave for good, and they never come back to see their spiritual father, in order not to be subjected to humiliation and mockery from him ever again. And this is a respected Archimandrite with a long beard, who has been instructing the monks of Valam and Optina, and who has given speeches to students of the seminaries and spiritual academies and universities in Moscow and St. Petersburg. He has been invited to meet with the parishioners of many churches in Russia, Ukraine, and Belarusia. His lectures have been published on Pravmir and Pravoslavia.ru, and he has been given airtime on the popular Russian Orthodox TV channel Soyuz. What can the abbot, who has not been able to manage the life of that small monastery in America, and the spiritual teacher, the elder who is so revered in Russia, have in common? They are the same man, Archimandrite Joachim Parr, a classic example of a pseudo-elder.
Both parents were educators.
Родители получили очень хорошее образование.
So, my father was a diplomat.
Отец занимался дипломатической работой.
And we traveled everywhere.
Мы проездили весь мир.
So my parents would teach us because we were never in school. 8 children had 2 university professors teaching them.
То есть у нас получается 8 детей, которые обучали 2 профессора с
хорошим
образованием.
There was classes.
В Америке.
But because I was moved ahead because of my schooling, I finished at 16.
Я закончил школу в 16 лет.
Father and others in the car today, I was realizing on September the 10th of this year,
Я вот вспоминал, меня спросили, сколько я монах, я вот вспоминал, мы посчитали 10 сентября.
it'll be the 58th anniversary of my entry in the monastery.
Будет 58.
Not at all. А вы давно монах?
For how long you are a monk?
Oh, goodness.
Господи.
30 years.
30 лет.
58 years ago, I went to the monastery as a Roman Catholic.
No, Archimandrite Joachim Parr has not been a monk for over 30 years, nor for over 58 years. His father wasn't a diplomat or a professor. His family was an ordinary American family, not an English family. And he, Parr, graduated from high school at age 18, not at 16 as he claims. He has never been a Catholic priest. He didn't spend half of his life as a monk in the Benedictine order. And he never spent 8 years as a monk on Mount Athos. No matter how entertaining the stories he tells about himself have been, his stories are nothing more than fiction, tall tales, or, to put it plainly, lies. The lies that helped him create an image of an elder with unquestionable authority in the Orthodox Church. In fact, the real story of Archimandrite Joachim's early life is very similar in many ways to the stories of thousands of other Americans who weren't born into wealthy families and who had to build their own careers. Here are some milestones from his life. John Gary Parr was born in 1943 in a small house in Oakland, California. The house was built in 1910 by his grandfather, a railroad employee. Archimandrite Joachim sold the house on October 15, 2007. Here is a photo of him standing in front of his house with the buyers on the day of that sale. John's mother was a homemaker, and his father was a butcher at a meat processing plant, according to census records and voter registration rolls. Like most children from Catholic families, John attended a Catholic school. He finished St. Mary's Catholic School at age 18 in 1961. Here are photos from his school album for 1960, a year before his graduation. After graduation from high school, he went to St. Patrick's Seminary and University, where he eventually graduated in 1970 with a B.A. A career as a Catholic priest clearly was not appealing to him, nor was it possible, because on September 13th of 1969, John obtained a marriage license with Miss Carol Ferry at San Mateo City Hall, California. Later, Carol would visit him in the early 2010s. Archimandrite Joachim would introduce her as his cousin to his parishioners. After trying several different jobs, John decided to become a school teacher. In 1976, he got a job at Salesian Catholic School in Richmond, California. Because of his teaching and organizational skills, John was able to move up very quickly from a curriculum coordinator of student activities to literature teacher and then vice principal. In 1980, there was an unexpected turn in John's life. At the height of his teaching career, he quit his job, stopped teaching, and left California for New York. In New York, John was given a place to live by a pastor Larry Bailey of the Lutheran Church on 19th Street. Later, he and Archimandrite Joachim would become co-founders of Mercy House. The old parishioners of the Orthodox Cathedral of the Holy Virgin Protection, OCA, on 2nd Street remember John, who joined them in the middle of the 1980s. According to their memories, he was a charming young man in a blue suit. John became Orthodox on July 20, 1987, through chrismation performed by Archimandrite Macari. In the same year, John was accepted to St. Tikhon's Orthodox Theological Seminary. The seminary yearbook contains John's photo as well as a short, false biography of him. After finishing his first year, John Parr was tonsured as a monk on June 24, 1988, with the name of Joachim. The tonsure was performed by Archbishop Peter of the OCA at Holy Virgin Protection Cathedral. The newly tonsured monk was not affiliated with any monastery. The same summer of 1988, Joachim Parr was expelled from the seminary, and later that year he left the OCA for the Old Calendar Schismatic Greek Church. On September 27, 1989, after having ordained him as a deacon, Metropolitan Paisius of St. Irene's Church in Astoria, New York, ordained the monk Joachim as a priest. Only 2 years had passed since his chrismation when he became a priest. Hieromonk Joachim didn't stay with the schismatic Greek Church for long. In 1990, he joined the Russian Church abroad. It seemed that there would be a great future ahead for the young monk if he joined the legendary Jordanville Monastery to learn monastic life. But the monastery, with its strict rules and mundane life, didn't appeal to him. His main purpose was to become a leader of others' spiritual lives. Hieromonk Joachim started serving at the Rocourt Cathedral in New York and other churches where he was temporarily assigned. He quickly gained a small following and was able to inspire people with his sermons. His experience of monastic life was limited to a short-term trip to Mount Athos in 1991. But this was enough for the young, self-confident hieromonk, so that in 1993 he asked the hierarchy of Rocourt for the blessing to open his own monastery. He managed to convince everyone that his long years of monastic experience as a Benedictine monk were enough to qualify him as an abbot. After getting a blessing, Hieromonk Joachim opened his monastery, known today as Mercy House. It had been only 6 years since he became a member of the Orthodox Church, when he became the spiritual leader for other monks. St. Ignatius Branchaninov said about other pastors such as Joachim Parr, "Soul-corrupting deeds and sad comedy, those elders who take on the role of the ancient holy elders, without their great spiritual gifts or even being aware of the ancient elders' intentions, thoughts, and concept of the great monastic life, which is obedience, so that the false elders' very ways of thinking, their false reasoning, their concepts, and their understanding are the essence of self-delusion and demonic charm." The so-called Mercy House is also known as the Monastery of St. Mary of Egypt, together with property purchased in upstate New York in 2008, called the Savior's Desert or Treadwell Abbey. The legal name of the organization is actually the Orthodox Christian Brotherhood of Our Lady of Mercy. Its legal status is that of a nonprofit educational corporation. In addition to Joachim Parr, the founders of the corporation were Pastor Larry Bailey of the Lutheran Church and Father Paul Strategaeus of the Greek Old Calendar Church. The purpose of the organization is the popularization and study of theology, philosophy, history, tradition, culture, faith, practice, liturgical principles, and beliefs of the Eastern Orthodox Christian Church, to provide instruction to the laity for spiritual growth, etc. For the Mercy House Monastery, they bought a 3-story townhouse. Although the building was in a dilapidated state, it cost around $170,000. Money for the purchase of the building was found immediately. The person or organization that funded the creation of Mercy House is still carefully concealed by Archimandrite Joachim, who tells a touching story about miraculously receiving a check for exactly the desired amount. There are hundreds of people who have come and left Mercy House over 20 years, but the structure of the relationship has remained the same. An inner circle of monks and nuns are under the total control of their spiritual leader. Potential monastic candidates are usually chosen from dedicated lay people who come often to church services. Other parishioners and friends of the monastery support it financially. Everyone who joins the Mercy House community is subject to the strict control of the abbot. Nothing is off limits, even for lay people, including what kind of clothes to wear, which schools children should attend, the kind of relationship allowed between a husband and wife, even whom to marry. Those who don't agree to execute the commands of their spiritual mentor are declared deluded, and the monastics and other parishioners are urged to stop interacting with them. The abbot has often revealed in confidential conversations with community members unseemly aspects of the personal lives of those who do not obey. As a result, those who were disobedient left the community. In the early 2000s, the Rocor hierarchy started looking closely into what was happening at the monastery. A conflict arose. Then Abbot Joachim took a radical step. Upon learning of the impending ban to keep him from serving, he changed the monastery's jurisdiction in 2001. Changing jurisdictions himself for the 4th time to join the Moscow Patriarchate. Naturally, he explained this move by invoking political differences with the Rocor Synod, thus concealing the true causes. In fact, most parishioners didn't follow their spiritual mentor, and this continued a never-ending series of scandals and departures from the so-called Brotherhood. Soon after this, Hierodeacon Samson left the Brotherhood. He had been tonsured by Abbot Joachim to the Great Schema. Father Ignatius, a monk who was tonsured by Abbot Joachim, left the monastery in 2006. A convent in Baltimore, also under Abbot Joachim's spiritual leadership, fell apart and its members scattered. In these photos, you can see some of the sisters of the convent. This photo shows many of the monks and a nun who were tonsured by Archimandrite Joachim at various times. This is their last group picture. From left to right are Sister Magdalena, who left in 2011 after she was hit repeatedly with a stick by a young novice. Archimandrite Joachim not only failed to protect her, but in fact, after the incident, that nun became the subject of regular verbal abuse and ridicule. The following is Sister Onufria's testimony. She lived at the monastery at that time. Arriving to Treadwell Abbey in 2010, I stayed with Archimandrite Joachim only long enough to support my sister in Christ there. This nun was attacked violently by a male novice in church after Matins about 4 months after my arrival. That was in 2011. I could not, even out of obedience, abandon her, as she was traumatized and blamed for the attack. For 8 months following the attack, she tried to live obediently, and nothing she did bore fruit. She was always the object of her spiritual father's contempt, gossip, ridicule. The atmosphere around the table at Trapeza was like a circus, and he was like the ringleader, always gossip and ridicule, and she was the most usual target. Sister Onufria left the monastery also in 2011 in August. She, like Sister Magdalena before her, was unable to tolerate any more the atmosphere of abuse and mockery at the monastery. This photo is of Hieromonk Savati, who was standing second from the left in the front row. He was Archimandrite Joachim's principal assistant and interpreter for a few years. He stopped working with Archimandrite Joachim in 2014. A member of the monastery, Simeon, who was recently tonsured by Archimandrite Joachim with the name Antipas, is the only monk who has remained with him at Mercy House. Hieromonk Silouan was subjected to ridicule and mockery by the abbot for years. He left the monastery in 2011. Monk Cornelius, because of threats and ultimata from the abbot, was forced to undergo an unnecessary surgery that almost cost him his life. After the surgery, which was fraught with lingering complications for years, he was left by the order of the abbot in the empty house of the monastery in New York City all alone, sick and helpless during the hot summer. Here is how Father Cornelius explains his departure in 2011. I became aware that details of my confessions were common knowledge in the community. The other factors which determined me to leave included the patent emotional abuse of fellow monastics, causing them to leave after losing heart, as well as the constant belittling of the female monastics and the physical assault on one of them by a male novice. Novice Tikhon left the monastery a year later after this photo was taken. Monk Sophrony left the monastery in 2013. Monk Sergius left the monastery in 2015. Novice Demetrius left the monastery after Archimandrite Joachim gave him an ultimatum demanding that he be tonsured a monk and transfer all his savings to an account of the monastery in 2 weeks. Hieromonk Zosimus went to another monastery with the blessing of the bishop after Archimandrite Joachim slandered him to the other monks and novices. Here's what he said about his departure. I joined the Brotherhood at Mercy House when I was 22 years old. 14 years later, I discovered that I had been lied to the whole time. Bold-faced lies about everything from the abbot's personal history to his ecclesiastical credentials, as well as slander, shady dealings with money, personal betrayals, etc. The extent of it is still unraveling after a number of years. In short order, I too was slandered and thrown out, given 3 days to find a place to live. 2 other monks were thrown out at the same time under the same circumstances, having lived there for over 10 years and 7 years respectively. A married deacon who served the church for over 10 years was also unceremoniously released at that time. So many people have been hurt there, we're still trying to help pick up the pieces, as the deceit and abuse continue. Father Michael was Archimandrite Joachim's spiritual son and an active assistant for 8 years. In 2011, he completely broke with his confessor. Here is how he explained this break. By that time, I realized that over many years, Archimandrite Joachim was using the confessions of my family to manipulate my children, exposing them to danger. In addition to that, several parishioners told me that they knew certain details of my life, which were revealed only to Archimandrite Joachim in my confessions. Only 2 of the parishioners in this photo have remained with their former spiritual teacher. All the others have left. Ia, a former Mercy House parishioner, explained her reason for leaving the community. Archimandrite Joachim told a bold-faced lie about my son and applied psychological pressure on both my son and me. He tried to sow discord in my family and between my husband and me, and this was all because my husband did not recognize Archimandrite Joachim as his spiritual mentor. The families in this photo also fled from Mercy House. We have shown only a small number of the parishioners, the monks and nuns who have suffered from the spiritual nourishment of Archimandrite Joachim. Although they all left at different times, the reason for leaving was the same. It was the realization that they had fallen into a totalitarian cult, where they were subjected to harassment and psychological abuse. And there is only one reason why more and more new people keep coming and joining the community, taking the place of those who leave. Yes, Archimandrite Joachim's fictional life story has been reprinted by many respected publishers without checking any facts. His story about the son of English aristocracy, who in childhood was blessed by St. John of Shanghai and at 18 years old became a Benedictine monk and then converted to Orthodoxy, who lived on Mount Athos as a monk and later received the blessing to return to New York to serve the poor. All this, in conjunction with his charismatic appearance and eccentric behavior, can block the critical thinking of someone looking for a spiritual teacher. Psychologists say that our perceptions of a person are usually based on external factors, such as physical appearance, including the clothes a person wears. Even more so, they are based on what others say about that person. So the image created around a teacher can influence people and lessen their skepticism and critical thinking about that person. This is why Archimandrite Joachim feels the need to make up a false and much more positive biography for himself. But every Orthodox Christian, as well as all those who plan to join the Orthodox Church, need to know the truth about Archimandrite Joachim's life and lack of monastic experience, as well as the ongoing abuses at Mercy House, in order to save their own souls from the dangers resulting from the manipulation of this pseudo-elder.